Welcome to our spine-chilling journey into the darkest highways and the most haunting tales ever told. Tonight, we bring you 10 terrifying truck stories that will make you think twice before hitting the road after dark. From ghostly apparitions to unexplained disappearances, these nightmarish encounters will leave you gripping your seat. Buckle up and turn on your lights, because the terror begins now. Stay tuned, if you dare, as we unravel these eerie tales of truckers' most horrifying nights. 1. I was convinced that I was about to murder a bunch of people. I worked for a company that owned a Caterpillar D9 bulldozer. It weighed over 100,000 pounds. They had to use a tractor from the 1980s with a drop trailer to move it off the property. Both were functional and as safe as they could be, but had seen better days. They asked me to deliver the bulldozer to another company, and I agreed. We loaded up the dozer, secured it to the trailer, and I was on my way. One of the intersections on this state route is notoriously bad. It's at the base of a hill, and if you're coming from the side the hill is on, you don't see the stoplight or traffic until you get over the peak of the hill. You still usually have plenty of room to stop. As I was approaching this intersection, my CB antenna lit up, and a guy was basically screaming into it for traffic at the peak of this hill to slow down. But the problem is that my CB wasn't tuned, and I only caught about every third word that I let off the accelerator when I peaked the hill, mostly because I hated that intersection. I would have had plenty of time to stop, even with the road conditions, if traffic was normal. Unfortunately, traffic was not normal. There was a fresh, pretty bad accident at the intersection, and traffic had backed more than halfway up the hill. The accident had just occurred, so there were no emergency services on scene, and I now had very little space to stop a very heavy load with a very old truck. I started downshifting and braking, realized I was going to be cutting it very close, and started braking harder. Then I realized I was hitting large ice patches on the road. The tires were slipping and jerking the tractor around, and I heard the fifth wheel clanking, and I felt the trailer tugging on the tractor in a weird way. So I looked at my driver's side mirror and didn't see anything, including the dozer. In a panic, I whipped my head around to look out the passenger mirror, and the only thing I saw was the entire side profile of the trailer and dozer. I had made a terrible mistake in letting that trailer get out from behind me. It was one of those, well, this is it, this is how I die moments that I was now jackknifing while still moving and still trying to slow the truck down while on an icy hill. I was headed for an intersection full of stopped passenger cars, and my truck weighed lot.by this point. I was thoroughly convinced that I was about to involuntarily murder a bunch of people. I laid on the horn as much as I could, but I was also trying to work the steering wheel in an attempt to pretend I had control. Honestly, I hit a point where I basically realized I was just a passenger standing on a brake pedal. I didn't have enough room to correct anything, so I just went all out on the horn. The trailer tires finally heated up enough to start making a very loud. There were a bunch of people in front of me that got out and ran away from their cars. They were basically staring at out-of-control death coming down the hill. The truck finally came to a stop within 3 feet of the last car in the intersection. I could sit on my truck's bumper and easily put my feet up on the car's bumper. The truck stopped with the trailer jackknifed, so I was blocking both lanes and the breakdown lane. I was sweating and was shaking from the anxiety. As I was sitting in the now stopped truck, the people who had abandoned their cars were now screaming at me and pointing up the hill. I looked up the hill to see another tractor, but a tank trailer, basically reliving everything I just had, with much less space to work with due to my trailer blocking so much of the road that I got out of my truck and ran away from it. The second truck slid down, stopped, and parallel parked almost perfectly with my truck. Once his truck stopped, I could see he was experiencing the same thing I was. We were both extremely close to being in bad accidents. Thankfully, he was pulling a dry tank. I am pretty sure that's the only reason he was able to stop. He was running much lighter than me.by this time. The guy on the CB got through to enough truckers at the top of the hill that they basically slowed everyone down. Once the adrenaline wore off, I almost passed out. I have operated a lot of different vehicles in my life, and that situation was easily the scariest operating situation I have ever lived. I had zero control of the situation, and that's a bad feeling for an operator. I remember the people that ran away from their cars were comforting me. It's been over 20 years since that happened, and I still get the willies when I think about it. Had I not been able to get that truck to stop, I would have ripped through all those passenger vehicles with little resistance. Another 5 miles per hour, or being in a different lane, just a bit more ice, even the time of day would have completely changed the outcome of that situation. It would have been entirely my fault, too. So I turned the lights off. I was delivering and installing machines. Since I was behind schedule, I decided to drive late to my next destination. There were no street lights, and no other cars. The peak of feeling like I was in the middle of nowhere. Every single light on the dashboard of the truck lit up, and then it stalled. Now it's pitch black. I am stopped, and the truck isn't restarting. I shut everything down and started making phone calls. I looked up and saw something move in front of the truck, just out of the distance of my hazard lights, that I finally got a hold of someone, and they told me it would be 2 to 3 hours before they could get a mechanic for me, so now I am sitting in silence. The only noise is the clicking the hazard lights are making, and I am staring out the windshield into a void of darkness when I see movement again. I threw on my high beams. The headlights caught 3 wolves snacking on something that looked like roadkill. I honked the horn, and they looked at me like they were irritated more than scared. The wolves more than likely weren't going to bother me, but it was spooky just knowing they were there. So I shut the lights off. I suddenly heard what I can only equate to a woman's scream of terror that sounded like it came from right behind the truck. Then something slammed into the side of the truck, hard enough to rock it that I turned every light on and laid on the horn. I was checking both mirrors, and the only thing I saw was a shadow bolt across the road. I also noticed the wolves were gone. From every nature documentary I've watched, the only time predators leave food is when there are bigger predators around. I could hear it thrashing around in the brush nearby, breaking sticks and what sounded to be logs. I basically had the steering wheel grip, all the lights on, and was feverishly looking out the windows and through the mirrors to make sure nothing was around the immediate area of the truck. Finally, I saw some headlights through one of my mirrors. The noise stopped as the headlights approached. It was obviously the mechanic. He pulled out in front of me. My headlights were shining on his truck. As his door opened to step out, we both heard the scream again, and the brush thrashing intensified. His door immediately closed, and my phone rang. He called my phone asking me what it was. He sounded more panicked than me. I had no clue what it was, and he had no clue what it was. So the mechanic called the police. 2 state police officers showed up. They lit that area up like it was a stadium. I finally stepped out of the truck for the first time since it all started. We heard that scream 3 more times while the mechanic was working on my truck. Thankfully, they were getting further away. The cops had no clue what it was either. They were kind of spooked, too. The mechanic finally got my truck running, and I made it to my hotel for the night. On the side of the truck that was hit, there was an indentation about the size of a basketball, about 7 feet off the ground, that I have no idea what it was. I probably never will. I do confidently know that I will never, ever drive through the Upper Peninsula at night again. 3. He pulled off onto the shoulder to park and cry his eyes out. My dad was a trucker for years. He was driving down a mountain in icy conditions, but they'd done a good job of salting the road, so he was doing all right. However, as he was coming down the last bit of slope, there was a bridge, and bridges are notorious for being icy, even when the rest of the road is dry. The moment he hit that bridge, his trailer started coming around. He could see it coming at him in the mirror. He said the rule is if your trailer passes 45 feet, you're an kid. No hope of recovery. Hold on to your *** and hope for the best. Well, his trailer passed 45 feet, and as he looked up ahead, the road on the far side of the bridge was bone dry. He knew in that moment that he was dead, that as soon as he hit that dry pavement, all hell was going to break loose. That he kept looking in his mirror and watching his trailer stuck out to the left and trying to find some way to save it, even though he knew he couldn't. But that dry spot was coming up quick. Only somehow, when he hit the dry road, everything just instantly straightened up like there had been no problem at all. That he pulled off onto the shoulder and parked to cry his eyes out and thank all the powers in heaven and earth that he was still alive. 4. That **T didn't make any sense. I used to travel for work doing construction. My boss was driving and I was passenger. We were on our way back home from Tennessee to Illinois, just leaving the mountains, but still pretty much in the middle of nowhere. We noticed a couple of dead deer on the road. These things are like exploded. My boss and I say something like, "That sucks. A semi must have been hauling and clipped a herd." We get to the top of a hill, and there are so many more dead, exploded deer. Possibly hundreds, definitely dozens. They didn't look like they got hit by a semi. They looked like they had sticks of dynamite put into them and lit off. Semi-trucks had definitely been driving through because we didn't have to dodge any of the deer. My boss had been on the road a lot more years than I had. I asked him, "What the hell was that?" And he seemed just as lost as me. Said, "I have no idea, and I'm not stopping to find out. That **T didn't make any sense." 5. Hey buddy, my brakes are on. My best buddy freshman year was a trucker. His worst story was when he was going down to Georgia, just a normal trip of diapers and baby wipes. He spent a good, long day traveling with a man who was carrying a full load of gasoline. The trip was a week long, and my buddy and this gas tanker guy spent the last 6 hours on the road together, shooting the *** through the radio and whatnot. After nearly a full day of talking, my buddy gets a call from the tanker guy. and my friend says the words ran his blood cold. "Hey buddy, my brakes are out." My buddy gets on the radio and lets the other truckers know. They try to cordon off the passengers behind him while police can make their way ahead of him, clearing the road. My buddy loses line of sight as they shut down the road, as there is now a very large bomb with no stopping power barreling down a popular freeway. They get the all clear to go ahead. The situation was resolved, and by the time my buddy got to the emergency stop section of the freeway, he saw that the entire section was a 50-foot wide crater, metal and dirt everywhere. But there was not a single injury or casualty, save for the brave tanker guy who dove headfirst towards his death to prevent any others. 6. My dad had to make a quick decision: cliff or rock face. My dad drove trucks while I was about 5 and my brother was 3. He did so entirely to make money to take care of us, which also means that he needed to be able to actually make it home to his kids at the end of the day. That he was driving up the side of a mountain that resembled one ripped right from a Bugs Bunny cartoon. It spirals up, has these rickety, flimsy metal guardrails that, had smart cars been invented, they still wouldn't have prevented even them from vaulting over the thing, let alone a semi. My dad was super tired, but he wanted to push it so he could get home faster. He was making his way up the mountain when, on his radio, he hears what he swore was "Flying Frenchman," followed by a whole bunch of hootin' and hollerin'. My dad apparently wasn't confused by the exclamation for long, as mere seconds later, 2 full-sized, seemingly fully loaded semis came barreling down the mountain on each side of the road. My dad had to make a quick decision: cliff or rock face. There was hardly a shoulder, but it beat almost certainly crashing into the side of the mountain. So he did what he could to avoid them the best that he could and went for the bank. My dad said that he turned the wheel as quickly but carefully as he could toward the extremely narrow embankment on his side, did everything he could to avoid skidding, and narrowly avoided the closest F******. He apparently also narrowly avoided jackknifing the truck, and the scariest part of all, his own semi had tipped during the procedure. All of the wheels on the one side of his truck got air, and he was sure he had just tipped the truck down a bloody mountain. Also, these 2A*** holes could have a F**** et up game of chicken, so the scariest thing my dad said he had ever seen while driving: a pair of flying Frenchmen. 7. He's gonna arrest me. I service fire equipment, so I drive a box truck. I was in rural, northwest Pennsylvania, returning from a service call and heading towards the interstate to go home. On the way to this customer, I saw a small pickup truck on the interstate whose right rear tire was steadily deflating. A mile or so before my exit, they pulled off to the side. I didn't stop to see if they needed help and felt a little bad about it as I drove down this dark, twisty road. I passed a Dodge Durango that was pulled over into a barn driveway. There was a person lying on the ground behind it, struggling with something. It looked like the guy was trying to change a tire or get the spare out from under the Durango. Remembering the pickup from earlier, I decided to turn around and see if he needed help. I pulled into the first driveway I saw, about a quarter mile down the road, turned around, and headed back. Halfway back, the Durango passed me, going the direction I had originally been headed. That I got back to where I had seen the Durango, planning to turn around again. But as I swung into the driveway, my headlights caught a figure lying motionless in the snow. That I stopped and jumped out just as the figure sat up. It was a woman, maybe in her 40s, in a thin, torn black skirt and top. Her hair was mussed, her eye was starting to swell. She had red marks on her throat, and her lip was bleeding. I helped her up, got her into my truck, and cranked up the heat. I had taken my jacket off, so I gave it to her, and she covered her torso and arms. She didn't want to say anything. Her throat was sore, and she was badly frightened. I called 911, and they dispatched a police car. I gave her a bottle of water, and she whispered, "Thank you," then sat with her head bowed and eyes closed. It took about 15 minutes for the police car to get there, and she stayed silent as the car pulled in. She said, mostly to herself, "He's gonna arrest me." The trooper walked up and motioned me to exit, asked her if she needed an ambulance. She declined, then asked me what had happened. I explained what I had seen. He wrote everything down, then talked to her for a few minutes. He helped her out of the truck and into his car. She quietly thanked me for coming back, because she thought that guy meant to kill her. As far as I know, she wasn't arrested. She was pretty beat up, and the trooper spoke and handled her as if she were the victim of an assault. It was almost certainly a transaction that had gone badly, and I never found out what had happened. I watched the news outlets for that area for a while, but never found anything. 8. Why did you stop? It's not your turn yet. Around 30 years ago, my dad was driving particularly late, returning home after being away for a while. It was around 2 or 3 a.m. when he saw an old lady walking on the side of the road. My father is a kind man, so he naturally pulled over and asked the lady where she needed to go or if she needed help. The lady just turned to him and said, "Why did you stop?" "It is not your turn yet." The lady dismissed my dad. Not wanting to make a scene, he left her alone and continued driving. Not even 5 minutes later, down the road he saw a crashed car with an ambulance already at the site. The following day, the crash was on the front page on a local newspaper. Apparently the driver died instantly on impact. He still wonders where that lady was going since the closest town was still 30 minutes away by car. 9. They saw a bunch of floating orbs. Had a family member who was a trucker for a fireworks company in the 80s. They regularly had to make deliveries from the East Coast to Los Angeles. Shipping these things to California meant many drives through the open desert of the American Southwest. They've claimed to see tons of weird stuff out there, from glowing orbs to unexplained lights to weird animals in the dark. The desert has a way of messing with the human mind, but one night, a bunch of floating orbs on the horizon turned out to be legit. They saw a bunch of orange orbs crossing the highway a mile or so ahead. It turns out that a bunch of tumbleweeds had caught fire in a forest fire several miles away and were flying across the highway ahead. They had to drive down this open desert highway while being on the lookout for flaming tumbleweeds. Not really something you want to maneuver around when you are carrying fireworks in your trailer. 10. It was just a really odd experience in 2017 on one of my routes. I had stopped at Love's gas station in Emerson, GA, maybe 20 minutes outside Atlanta. I had stopped for about an hour, just resting and eating some fast food, when a woman came knocking on my door. I opened it and she looked homeless and pretty old, like in her 50s or 60s. I asked her if I could help her, and she was like, "I think we can help each other." I declined and sent her on her way. I continued to rest and eat and play on my phone for another 30 minutes when someone came to my door, opened it, and attempted to rob me in a scream mask. It was obviously the old lady from before. I pushed her away, locked my door, and cranked it up. I assumed she ran off somewhere because I could no longer see her. After the truck was ready, I pulled off and started driving. Soon, cars started trying to get my attention, honking and pointing to the back end of my truck. I pulled over, and when I came to a stop, I saw someone jump and start running. It was that same lady. This crazy woman was hanging on to the back of my truck while I was driving. It was just a really odd experience.